So welcome everyone to another podcast episode. And today I have a pleasure of speaking with Tessa Venuti Sanderson. Hello, Tessa.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for joining me today. So Tessa is a yoga teacher and trainer, birth trauma specialist, and also of upcoming book of circle facilitation or about circle facilitation. And I've had a pleasure of collaborating with Tessa in the past, and we've done some other interviews and talks around birth trauma. So it's always a pleasure coming back and chatting with you, Tessa.
Yeah, there's always a lot to talk about with you.
Yes. Yes. And so today, I'd like to start from the beginning because maybe people have not watched or listened to the past kind of conversations that we have. And I always like to start from the beginning and kind of, if you could tell us a little bit about your own journey. Like, how did you end up doing what you're doing right now? And there is so much that you are doing right now. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, it started at university. I went originally to study architecture. And then I switched into studying geography and anthropology. While I was at university, I went to see what societies were available and came across a meditation society. And that was my route really into yoga, was the meditation first. And after a few years of doing meditation, I got more interested in all the other aspects of yoga. And after a few more years, thought, well, I would love to start sharing this with people. So I did my British Wheel of Yoga training. And then quickly after that, decided that I'd like to specialize in pregnancy yoga because I was getting people coming into my general classes and could modify for them, but felt like they weren't getting the best experience when they were sort of headed towards this sort of rite of passage that was coming up. Alongside that, though, I was also working in research. So for some years, I worked in a rheumatology department. And because of that, I think where there is evidence for things, I like to have an evidence base for what I'm teaching to people. And that got me interested also in, the trauma angle. I was doing a lot of work around long-term conditions and chronic illness and how that affects people's lives and how they explain what's happened to them. So over the years, I began to become more and more interested in how can I bring a sort of trauma-informed approach into the yoga that I teach. And also, I became interested in circles. First of all, I think it was that I read a book about the red tent. There's a novel called The Red Tent. And as I was reading it, I thought, wow, I'd love this now, a space where I could be with other women and hear about their experiences. And the Red Tent is a bit more focused on menstrual cycle awareness. And I looked for a circle local to me and couldn't find one. It would be about a sort of an hour and a half to the nearest one at the time. So I just took the plunge and set one up. And for many years, I had actually two websites. I had one for all the yoga stuff that I was doing, and I had one for all the circle work and the menstrual cycle awareness work that I was doing. And after a while, I began to think, why am I keeping them separate? Because I realized that the people who come to yoga are interested in being in a circle, and people who come to the circle are interested in yoga. So I brought everything together, and that's sort of led me to what I do now, which is partly one of the things is teaching people how to facilitate circles.
Lovely. There is so much here. I mean, our paths crossed around the trauma-informed yoga, and it's so lovely to work and collaborate with somebody like you who's got loads of experience. And I know, your background in research is really important. I know that you, from our past conversations, that you also do quite a lot of kind of collaborative stroke research work with hospitals and with midwifery. And talking about the birth trauma, talking about something that is really quite difficult to talk about. It's like, we talked about that in the past, that it's something that for so many women, they don't really have the time to address till much later. Like, you give birth, it might have been quite traumatic, and then you start caring for this little baby, and that needs to take all your focus and all your attention. And that how important it is to recognize it and give women space, and even if it is many years down the line, to offer that space and that recognition and that acknowledgement that those experiences might have been very traumatic. And so, yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's different reasons why birth trauma can happen. But sometimes it's because there's a power differential between maybe the health professionals and then the parents. And particularly when somebody feels like they're not being listened to and they've completely lost control of the situation, then obviously, that could be very psychologically damaging. And I think that's why I've been so attracted to the circle work, because when you sit in a circle, you're trying to lessen that power differential between, that's why we physically sit in a circle. And it then means, as a facilitator, you're trying to give people an equal chance to express themselves if they want to speak. You don't have to speak at a circle. You can come and listen. That's a very important function as well. But for me, it's very much about this power dynamic, and that sometimes in a circle you're giving voice to people that may never have felt like their voice is important before. They've never had somebody deeply listen to them before. They might have had people say, "How are you?" and then just talk over the answer. And just simply being witnessed in a circle where you feel like your voice is important can be so incredibly healing without anything else happening. So I think that's how some of the things I do connect. It's about also the way that I teach yoga is, particularly in a birth trauma situation where it's usually one-to-one, is we're co-creating what we're doing. It's not me telling, right, now you do this, now you do that, and lots of instructions. But I'm saying, well, how do you feel about doing this kind of breathing? Let's give it a go. How is it feeling? And we can adapt. It's a very different way of teaching than when I first did my training, where it was sort of command language and you're giving lots of instructions. You follow me. It's a world away.
Yes, it's the power dynamics. It's really interesting always, discussing it. It's like for many, and I think sometimes teachers, especially teachers who haven't been teaching for a long time and haven't had that kind of education, come from this perspective of, but I am very inclusive and I am very understanding and I am very compassionate, and not actually understanding that there is always a power dynamic happening, even through just using the words teacher and a student. I'm the teacher, I know what I'm talking about. You are the student, you need to follow. And through the language and through that collaboration, we can reduce it. But this is, as you just said, this is much more obvious, and something that happens much more when there is, for example, within that context of birth or giving birth, where one professional is from medical background, and then there is the parent, whether it's the mother or the father, sometimes not being included in the decision-making process. Yeah.
And I think that's where maybe all the work I did with my research background comes in, because the department I worked for was world renowned for service user involvement. So what that means is, so if we were doing a study about rheumatoid arthritis, you would have somebody who has rheumatoid arthritis as part of the research panel, and they would give feedback on the proposal right at the beginning of the whole, start of trying to get funding for the piece of research. They'd be there giving feedback, maybe if it was a questionnaire, on the wording of the questionnaire, or if it was interviews, on the kind of interviews that you'd be asking, on involved in the analysis. So at every point trying to involve the service user. And although there has been a move in the maternity system to do that, I've been a volunteer for the Maternity Voices Partnership for probably about 7 years, I think, maybe more. So they try and get people involved. It might be new parents, or it might be people who work, perinatal professionals of some kind, to collect feedback about the pregnancy journey, about the experience during the birth itself and postnatally. Getting feedback on the kind of leaflets that are given to pregnant people. But it's so hard to make sure that it's not just tokenistic and you're sort of ticking a box, but you're actually making sure that what people are saying is actually brought through into the practice.
Mhm.
And a topic that comes up again and again every meeting is communication. That people just don't feel that they're being listened to. So it's a constant thing that I think we have to be aware of. And I think sometimes it's that people think they know what the person's saying, but actually they haven't completely understood. They're seeing that experience through their own lens, and then interpreting. So it's a constant process.
Yeah, I mean, communication is always a challenge, isn't it? Because we all see the world through our own experiences, through our own lenses. I can see that quite a lot around. A lot of companies have now put on their website that they are trauma informed, but actually haven't really changed their processes or their systems and the way how they deal with things. And it does sometimes feel like it's just a tick boxing exercise that people just, because it's required, meeting it on a very minimal level. And so I wanted to kind of ask about the women's circles and the inspiration behind your book. Congratulations. So, you were saying to me earlier before we started the podcast that your book is coming out in October. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's called Circle Holding, a practical guide to facilitating talking circles. And it came about because, as I said before, I just decided, right, I'm going to set up my own circle because there isn't one around me. And I had been to circles as part of trainings or on retreats that I'd been on. So I wasn't completely new to it. But at the time, there wasn't a training that I could see, that I could attend. So the book really is to be very practical, to take people through an understanding of what it means to hold space, to create kind of container for people to come together and share their experiences. And it's 20 chapters. Who knew there was so much to say about talking circles? And it has chapters about children, about bringing embodiment in, online circles. So we've tried to cover different eventualities. We is Julia Davis, my co-author, and myself. And I think it's really to try and get across that, we could do with a circle on every corner. I'm always, sometimes people say, oh, I've heard a new circle starting where you live. I'm like, great. I don't see it as competition. I think it can act as a safety valve for people, if in our society, if we all had a circle where we could go and express ourselves and express what's going on for us, it would really help decrease isolation and also so many other beautiful things. And I think when a circle is done well, when it's facilitated well, it can look super easy. You bring people together, they talk, they have a good time, they go off. But actually, to facilitate well sometimes takes a lot of skill, because it might be you've got really big personalities in the circle, or people that have been having a difficult time and have a lot that they want to share, and it's quite hard to rein them in to give other people a chance to speak as well. So there's lots of sort of tips and tricks and practices that you can use to help you facilitate. So it's trying to give people lots of ideas about how they can create as safe a place as possible. We also like the term brave space, because I think the term safe space has somewhat been overused. It's bandied around a bit like trauma-informed practice. So a brave space where you can't completely 100% guarantee when you've got a group of people, some of which you may never have met before, is going to be completely safe, but you can put lots of things into place to try and make it as helpful as possible for some.
Yeah, this is why I always talk about safe enough space. You know, you can't, you know, it can be challenging, it can be taking you out of your comfort zone, but it can be safe enough. It can be still safe enough. And in fact, it's quite interesting that you're using the word brave space, because actually to come out of comfort zone, you need to have courage, and it will take you into the unknown. It will make you feel vulnerable. It will make you face maybe lots of different feelings. But if you want to come out of that comfort zone in order to learn or to heal or to grow, you just have to do that. And it might not feel 100% safe, but it will feel, as long as it feels safe enough, it will, you know, you will be able to do that. If it doesn't feel safe enough, you're going to go into a shutdown or freeze and retract completely. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, you know, I've been holding circles as well for a long time. When I had my yoga studio, we used to call them women's moon lodges. And we ran them every 6 weeks on a full moon or new moon. And I really, really loved them. So part of my training that I'm running at the moment, the trauma-informed somatic teacher and coach for women, you know, we have a model, one whole lab on women's circles. So we cover kind of basics. And some of the conversations that I've been having with female practitioners were really interesting. That for some of them, embracing circles was really natural. Like, yes, this is really great. Women coming together, wonderful. Exactly what you just said. Amazing. If there are circles all around, that's really good. But for some of them, a lot of resistance came up. And I think what they were talking about was that how the circles, you know, just like trauma-informed approach, the circles are like every time I open my Facebook account, an advertisement about circle holding certification or training comes up. They have become very, very popular. Especially within the yoga community, a lot of yoga teachers are holding circles. So where it used to be a little bit more fringe years ago, now it becomes really, really well known. And I guess some of the female practitioners just felt that resistance to holding circles, and because of the way that it's promoted sometimes with this kind of image of let's just come together, and it's also love and light, and it's also beautiful, and it's also, you know, we look at some cards and we've got a beautiful altar and it's all kind of light and beautiful. And I guess maybe because, you know, our work, the kind of stuff that we are looking at is how to bring that balance, how to keep it safe enough. So I wondered if you had any thoughts around that.
Yeah, no, what I've noticed is, for example, around menopause, yoga for menopause, or personal trainers doing sort of advanced training in menopause, very often they're recommended to hold a menopause circle. And it's said like that, and just like, go away and do one. And I always think, oh, it's not as easy as it first might sound, because people might sometimes have experiences of creating a lovely space, you know, decorating it, and like you say, having some beautiful oracle cards, and a group comes together and has a lovely time. But sometimes it can be incredibly challenging. I mean, over the years, I've been running my women's circle, the same one, for 10 years, month in, month out, went online during the pandemic, We've had all sorts of experiences happen in that circle. I remember before the pandemic, and she's given me permission to talk about it. It's in the book as well. A lady who came to the circle, and she said that the night before that she'd tried to kill herself. And that was in the opening circle, as we were going around with just sharing our names, and we were doing a focus at that time on menstrual cycle awareness. So we were sharing where in the cycle we were. And I could kind of hear this collective gasp, like, oh gosh, we weren't expecting that. And, you know, this is years on now. And she said it was really a defining moment, because instead of rushing in and all of us getting upset or anything like that, we were just able to hold the space for her to share how she'd felt the day before, and that she was in a better place now. And she hadn't told, I think she had told her father, but she hadn't told anybody else. And it was just to have that space where she felt like she could share it without being judged.
I love
But
that.
as the facilitator, that was a lot, because I wasn't expecting it. I didn't know how everybody else in the circle was going to feel. I didn't know maybe if they'd had personal experience of that for themselves, or family members or friends. But, you know, when she talks about it now, it was a really critical moment for her, because she, with the rest of her family, she thought that they would have reacted very badly if she'd shared that with them. So to just be with her and listen to her, and not try and come in and save the day or anything like that, was a real turning point.
Yeah. And I guess that, you know, this is a really good example. And sometimes people think, well, the larger the group, the more of a chance of something like this happening. And, you know, my experience, I remember the most challenging session that I had of holding groups, I had only 4 people. And similar kind of thing happened to what you are saying. You know, somebody said as well something really very traumatic that happened to them, and everybody froze. And so it's not the size of the group, it's just understanding that it could happen, and having the skills to actually be able to be with it without trying to rescue, without trying to save, without freezing yourself as a practitioner, you know, holding it safe enough. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that, to kind of the kind of skills that circle holder should really develop, or needs to develop, to hold safe enough space.
Well, the other thing that's just coming to mind is that I think sometimes we're attracted to running circles about something that's really relevant to us. So I gave the example before of menopause. So it might be that somebody's decided to go and do some training around yoga for menopause, or personal training for menopause, but they're actually in the middle of processing their own journey with it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I always bring up on the trainings is, I think I feel it's fair, if you're in a circle, even as the facilitator, that you can share, you know, how you are, but you share things that are processed. You don't share something that is very raw, or that's just happened and you haven't had chance to understand how it feels. You've not had a chance to reflect about it. So I think it's really important to know when you might need to have a break from facilitation and step outside and think, you know, I'm not in a place at the moment where I can hold this space for everybody else because something big's just happened. Or it might be you can, as long as you don't go into a certain topic. You know. So I think we have to be aware of our own circumstances. But I think for me, one of the main things is the guidelines that you share. And it starts before the actual circle. So it might be that you're advertising your circle, or you're sending somebody an email before they come and join your circle, and you're already trying to get across the values of that circle. So you might be talking about confidentiality, you might be talking about the fact that you're not trying to fix things or find solutions for people. It's really about witnessing and deeply listening. So you're already setting up the expectations of what it's going to be like to be in the circle. And then when people come, you might have some kind of opening practice or some initial check-in, but quite quickly in the circle, you're sharing the guidelines for how you're going to communicate. And as the facilitator, that then means that if something problematic starts to happen, you can refer back to the guidelines. So perhaps it's about, a guideline might be lean speech. So by that I mean, rather than going off on a very long narrative and all the backstory, and you're choosing your words carefully about how you're feeling now about a situation, and you're talking from I feel this, rather than, oh, my mum did this and my dad did it, you know. So if you set that up at the beginning, if somebody starts to dominate, you can come in gently and say, I just want to remind you that, you know, I want to give everybody a chance to speak in the circle. And I was wondering, you know, how you've been sharing a bit about your experience and the story, but I'm just wondering, how do you feel right now? So you're bringing it back into the present moment, rather than needing to know all the details of how that person got there and what other people think. So I think sometimes as a facilitator, it's like we're sharing maybe a new way for somebody of how to listen to other people, but also a new way of how to speak to other people. And I think for me, that's the beauty of a talking circle, is that rather than in everyday conversation where we think we know how the encounter works and that we're going to take turns, and in a circle, it's laid out, or I think it should be. So you know that it should be kept confidential, what's said in the circle, and you have a sense that you're going to take turns to speak, you're not talking over each other. It's all very explicitly laid out. And then if the facilitator has done that groundwork, it's much easier then to deal with issues that come up later.
Yeah, I love that. That's really, really clear, isn't it? It's like setting the container. This is how we work. And I loved what you said right from the beginning. You know, when you are advertising your circle or you're talking about it, you're inviting people to join you, you're very clear about how you are going to be working within that. I mean, you know, I had experiences where, especially one experience where I went to the workshop, like a day retreat, as a participant, and we were in a circle. It was held like a circle, but also like a workshop. So it was like a crossover thing. And it was with focus on the Shakti energy. And there is loads I could say about it. It was very cathartic. It was definitely not trauma-informed. And the way that it was advertised, it wasn't not laid out how it's going to be. And when we were doing the initial checking in a circle, there was one of the participants who said, I've just been through a lot of trauma. I'm still processing it. I need to take care of myself within here. And then after the checking in, we were told, no matter what happens, you cannot leave the room because you're going to break the Shakti energy. And that person just said, well, in that case, I cannot stay because I might have to leave if it becomes too much, the noise or anything else, you know, and they left. And one of the things that I always thought about this particular example was, you know, if that was specifically said at the point of advertising that event, like, we're going to keep it safe enough, but you need to be aware of that once we start, the way that we run it for the energy, we're going to ask you not to leave the room. But anyway, can you ever really tell somebody not to leave the room if they need to? I don't think that could ever happen. You know, that could have been prevented. That person wouldn't have wasted their money and their time coming in to that event. And I think there is something about those ground rules that you are talking about, that it's like, this is how we do it. And the clearer they are, the more a person can take personal responsibility to actually decide for themselves. Yes, that resonates. Yes, I'm happy with it. Or no, I'm not ready for it. Or no, that doesn't resonate. I don't want to be part of it. And, just by doing this initial thing changes completely how you set everything up and the feel of it. It kind of makes it so much safer for people to arrive. And I guess this is, my question would be, how many of the circles actually have got those kind of guidelines, coming together where it's very specific and what's your experience of it? Like when you are training people, because I know you run training certification, when people come to your training certifications and they share their stories, how often do they, if they run circles before, how often do they have those guidelines in place?
I'm not sure that we've asked directly that question, but there's certainly lots of experiences they've shared where it's been unclear how the circle's going to unfold. And I think sometimes timekeeping can be a big issue.
Don't get me started on that.
I've been to circles where had a lovely time. It's sort of been advertised as 2 hours maybe, and then it's just continues and continues and continues. I think from the facilitator's point of view, they thought, well, everybody seems to be having an amazing time and it's wonderful, let's just keep going. But that can be problematic for somebody who needs to get back to look after children, or needs to get a particular bus, or maybe it's an evening thing and you have to get up early for work the next day. So personally for me, I think it's really important to be clear about timings, and it might be for some demographics, for some types of circle, that you have a very clear start time where you really expect people have arrived before then, and then you all start together because of those guidelines, so that you can share them, you're all understand kind of how it's going to work. If somebody comes in late, you'd have to go through them all over again. Other demographics, it might be a softer start. So, for example, I run a pregnancy and sort of new mum circle, and it's okay if somebody comes a bit later. I have a co-facilitator, and if somebody arrives late, she'll go over and welcome them in and get them a cup of tea and explain what's been happening so far and go through the guidelines. So they're brought up to speed outside of the circle, and then they come and join in, because life with a baby, anything can happen at the last minute. I've got a trainee who does carer circles. So again, sometimes their lives can be chaotic. They need to make sure the person they care for is looked after. If the person who's meant to take over doesn't arrive, they might be late. So again, a soft start is appropriate. But I think equally, as the facilitator, we have a responsibility to finish on time, or very clearly explain, officially the circle finishes at this time. We will then have some socializing time if you can stay.
Yeah, I love that you just talked about this. This is like a big thing for me. It's personally, being in circles or being in at events where people didn't hold on to time, and how anxious I can feel because I have got something else in place. And this is around professional boundaries, isn't it? Like, you wouldn't go to a doctor or a dentist and then 3 hours later you are still there, unless there is a crisis situation that maybe they need to deal with. I think for many people, when you are thinking about the kind of phone response around trauma, and some people will say, sorry, I have to go. I have to go because I have got, but there are lots of people that wouldn't. Like, if they go into freeze and shut down and then phone, when they kind of say yes and they stay quiet because they are not feeling strong enough to actually say, no, sorry, I have to go. I don't want to do this. I have to do something else. we can completely miss out those clues from people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think another aspect of this is whether you charge for circles or not. Because sometimes I've had experience of going to circles where there isn't a charge. Perhaps sometimes it's been a collaborative circle where you take turns in hosting a circle and it moves around. But what I found with those is that sometimes it's seen more as a social event. And so people are more likely to turn up when it suits them. They're coming after the initial round has been done and the guidelines have been introduced. And it's much harder as a facilitator to hold that kind of circle. If somebody has committed because it might be a small fee, but it's just, I think there's a change in mentality when you said, yes, I'm definitely coming, I've booked my place. There's an expectation that the facilitator will be at a certain level holding that space. And I think there's a different kind of commitment from the person coming. But there's different models. There's a group that runs local to me that works with in sort of disadvantaged areas, and they wanted to make sure that mums would be able to access it, whatever their financial circumstances. So what they did, instead of charging, is to get they've had funding from the local council, from the lottery. They've got the money to help pay for the venue and pay for their time facilitating, and then it is free at the point of access. So there's lots of variables depending on the demographic that you're interested in. But I think it's something to think about very carefully, because, I think as a facilitator, you probably want to go to your own circle where you go as a participant and you can lean into that beautiful space. And are you making enough money that you can afford to do things like that? And maybe you need supervision or, a regular counselling session to support you in the work that you do. So I think this issue, there's there used to be the Red Tent directory. It's not functioning anymore because they found there was a lot of administration work involved in it. But they were always very clear that it should be free or by donation, and I had found that quite problematic actually, because knowing the amount of work that goes into organising, letting the world know that it's on and sending emails, talking to people, preparing for the talking circle, I always put time and energy into that. It didn't always sit well with me that I should be asked to do that for free or by donation.
I completely agree with you there. And I think this is, from my perspective, it perpetuates this kind of belief that things should be for free. But then, and yes, I agree that things needs to be accessible. But from the practitioner's point of view, there is only as much time as we have, and we have to pay for our training. You just mentioned supervision or mentoring or coaching, that support that we need. Like so many of us are struggling financially, and we don't have extra resources to pay for somebody else to support us. When we look at the yoga community or well-being community, burnout is such a high prevalence, within those communities. And I think one of the ways to really change it is to understand that if you're a professional, if you embrace that role as a trained professional, working in a certain kind of field where you paid for a lot of training and you need support and you're continuously, just paying for being part of the accreditation body, paying for your insurance, paying for your transport, for the materials, all of those. If we embrace that role as being professional, then we need to charge for the services. And I love what you just said. There are different ways that we can get paid for our expertise, our time, and our role as a practitioner. It could be directly from the clients. It could be by getting funding. It could be ourselves. It could be by collaborating with charities and other projects that could support us and apply for joint funding. There are many, many different ways. And I think really we need to move away from this image and role that it is, and you know, I don't know if you agree, but it often ties in that money is not spiritual, and you know, if you want to be spiritual, you shouldn't really charge, and you should give it out of for the service and out of the goodness of your heart because you believe in it, because you're passionate about it. But actually, if you're spending, you know, if you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, worrying about how you're going to pay your bills and you're struggling yourself, then that's not the best place to be, to actually hold space for other people. I think we have to turn it, you know, for all of us, and start looking after ourselves first. So then we are, you know, our needs are met and more, and then we can give from that solid, stable space.
Yeah, because I think, you know, there are quite a lot of circles that are quite specialist and do need expertise. So, for example, there are grief circles. So if somebody's facilitating a grief circle, they need to have done a fair amount of their own work to kind of be in a place where they've processed things that have happened in their life that they can then hold space for other people that might be really in the midst of their grief. I've spoken to you before about pregnancy circles. Now, they can be such an incredible resource. I think it's really important that women hear from each other about experiences of going through birth. But of course, you have to hold that very sensitively, because if they've had a traumatic experience or a challenging birth experience, if there's a new mum sitting there who's got their birth journey ahead of them, it could be terrifying if they hear something that's unprocessed and unworked through, and you let that person dominate the circle and they're left without a sense of resolution, maybe. So I think, you know, if you're having facilitators that are doing that kind of work, their expertise really needs to be recognised, and there needs to be some compensation for that through, you know, the circle being paid for in some way.
Completely. So they can continue their work, you know, and they can then pay for the support and take care of themselves so they can continue giving. I think it's moving away from seeing self-care as the kind of secondary afterthought kind of thing, and moving into really understanding that self-care needs to be a priority, and getting paid for your work comes under that self-care. So then you can support others, definitely.
I can 100% say, 100%, that if I hadn't been charging for my women's circle, it wouldn't still be going 10 years later. Because there would have been times where life was really busy around the children or my parents' ill health or something like that. I would have said, that's just one thing too many. But because there was a paid element to it, and it's enabled it to go. I've never once resented turning up to that circle, because I feel that what I'm doing is completely valued.
I love that.
That's the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years of running a circle, it's amazing. That's really good chunk of time, and building a community. Yeah. Some really great points here, Tessa. Thank you so much. I absolutely love chatting with you, as always. And I just wanted to ask, before I ask you about share where people can find about your work, I just wanted to ask one last question. If somebody was thinking about setting up their own circle as a practitioner, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give to them? There might be loads, and we talked about lots of stuff, but what is the one thing that they really need to know?
Remember that you're human. Because I think sometimes people really worry about those extreme situations, like we were talking about, somebody saying that they've been thinking about committing suicide, or, you know, they think, what if that really big stuff comes up, and that puts them off from getting started. But you know, in all of those situations, yes, I've had my facilitator hat on with the skills, but mainly I've reacted as a human being who just cares about other human beings.
I love that. I love that, that shared humanity. And, you know, we do it on a daily basis, don't we? We connect with others, we listen, we witness, and actually bringing that humanity is so important. I love it. Thank you, Tessa. So if somebody, well, if people wanted to follow up and find out more about your work, where can they find you?
So you can either look at my personal website, which is tessavenutisanderson.co.uk. That talks about all the pregnancy, the menstrual cycle awareness, all the different things that I do, or specifically around the circle work is circleholding.org. And that will tell you information about the book and trainings that we have coming up, from introductions to much longer trainings for those that want support as they keep on running their circles, because I think they can change the world.
Yeah, they definitely do. And actually, you know, they nothing new. If you look at the history of circle holding, women always have been coming together fighting for women's rights, voting rights, rights to you know, reproductive rights, all sorts of different things. So great to see them growing bigger and growing in strength. So thank you so much, Tessa. It's been a pleasure chatting with you today.
Thank you.